Hello again, and welcome to the Interchange Book 3 video series. Today we're going to be doing Unit 14, and we're talking today about relative clauses. And we're looking specifically at the difference between defining and non-defining relative clauses. So, let's get started. Okay, so here we have Mike and Monica. Mike is having a party at his apartment. So Monica and Mike are good friends from when they were young, but haven't seen each other for a while. Monica doesn't know some of the people at the party, so she's asking Mike about some of them. So let's listen to the conversation that they have about the different people at the party.
Hey, this is a great party, Mike. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Yeah, no worries, Monica. I'm just glad you could make it. It's been a long time since I saw you last.
Yeah, it's been a long time. I don't recognize many of your friends anymore.
Really? Like who?
For example, I don't think I've ever seen that guy over there.
Which guy? Are you talking about the guy that is in the yellow shirt?
Who, John? No, I know who he is. Remember, he used to date my roommate, who I hated in college.
Oh yeah, that's right. I almost forgot that they went out for a little while.
I'm talking about the guy who was dancing with that girl over there.
Oh, Peter! Yeah, he's my new coworker that I was telling you about.
Oh, okay. He's the guy that you share an office with, right?
Yeah, that's him. And so Peter, who loves to dance obviously, is dating the girl in the green sweater.
Ah, okay. Who's that other girl?
You mean the girl who Peter's dancing with? That's my cousin Ashley.
No, not her. I met Ashley at your brother's wedding last year, remember? No, I'm talking about the girl who was standing alone by the window.
Oh, her! That's Kim. She's Ashley's friend that's studying abroad right now. She's from Korea.
Really? Maybe I should go talk to her. I wonder if I remember my Korean from when I lived there.
That's right, you should. Because I'm pretty sure that she's from Seoul, which is the place where you lived, right?
Oh, cool. What a coincidence. I'm gonna go talk to her right now.
Okay, so after listening to that conversation, let's look at our grammar. And our grammar today is looking at something called relative clauses. Relative clauses. So, what are relative clauses? Well, relative clauses give more information about the words that they follow. And they begin with relative pronouns. So, let's look at what relative pronouns are. Relative pronouns are words like who, and we use that to give extra information about people that we are talking about, or that, and that is kind of flexible because we can use it to give extra information about people or things, right? But there's an exception with this one, so let's be careful. But we also use which to give extra information about things or objects, okay? So if we remember this conversation at the party, right? Monica says, "Hey, which guy is Peter? Which guy is Peter?" And the guy replies, he says, "Peter is the guy who is dancing." Okay? So this is what we're going to look at today, this type of information. Who is dancing? That's giving extra information about the word guy. It comes immediately after the word guy, and it's describing more information about which guy, right? So this is an example of a relative clause. Now, we have different types of relative clauses, okay? We have defining relative clauses and non-defining relative clauses. So, defining relative clauses give essential information to define a word. So if you ever ask yourself which one, and you give extra information to describe and define which one, that's a defining relative clause because we define which one are we talking about. The other type we have is a non-defining relative clause. And basically these give extra information about a word but does not define the word. Okay? So they're very different. This one's telling me which one specifically, defining relative clauses, and this one is just giving me extra information. It's not defining. So let's look at some examples of these. So let's look at specifically the defining relative clause. And remember, these give essential information to define which one are we talking about. So if we remember, she said, who is that guy over there? But we had 1, 2, 3 different guys. So he's going to say, well, which one? Okay? So whatever information she's going to give is going to describe specifically which one, so she's defining it. And she's going to say something like this. I'm talking about the guy who is dancing. Or I'm talking about the guy that is dancing. Okay? So if we look at this, right? If I look at the word guy and I say I'm talking about the guy, again, he's thinking which one? Which guy are you talking about? So the information after the word guy is going to define him. It's the defining information about him, right? So if I say I'm talking about the guy who is dancing or that is dancing, this is a defining relative clause. This information is defining the word guy. Again, that information is defining which guy. There are many guys, right? Good. Now let's talk about what we're doing here. I can use who, right? Because it's a person. I'm talking about a guy. And we said who is for people, so that's okay. And we can use that, right? Because that is for people or for things. And this is a person, so I can use that. But let's be careful. Let's look at this. That only used in defining relative clauses. So I can only use that if it's a defining relative clause. And it is a defining relative clause. Now if it's a non-defining relative clause, I cannot use that. So let's look at an example of this. Okay, so remember, the non-defining relative clauses give extra information about a word, but does not define the word. So we know that this is Peter now. She knows that this is Peter. He obviously knows this is Peter, and they are talking about Peter. So she says, oh, okay, so that's Peter. I remember you told me about him, right? So now he wants to give some extra information about Peter. So he can say, Peter, who loves to dance, is dating the girl in the green sweater. And this is what an example of a non-defining relative clause is, right? If we think about this, Peter is a person that both of them now know. That we're not thinking to ourselves, which Peter are you talking about? So when we talk about Peter, we're just going to give extra information about Peter. And that's what the non-defining relative clauses do. They give extra information about something that we just talked about. Okay? So this information is not defining Peter. We understand who Peter is. It's just giving extra information. And for that reason, it's a non-defining relative clause. Okay? Now, the other thing we can think about is that when I use a non-defining relative clause, I always separate it from the other part of the sentence with commas. So these are commas. So that's one way of identifying a non-defining relative clause, is when you have commas. Okay? Now, the other thing we need to think about is that we said that, well, that can be used for people, but in this context, I cannot use that. Why? Because this is a non-defining relative clause, and that is only used in the defining relative clauses. So I cannot use that in this situation because I'm only giving extra information about Peter. I am not defining who Peter is. Okay. Okay, so let's do some extra practice. Okay, so we're going to talk about this girl. If we remember, her name was Kim, and they were talking about her. So I want you to look at this sentence, and I want you to decide if this is a defining or a non-defining relative clause that we see here. So it says, she is from Seoul, Korea, which is the place where Monica lived. Okay, so is this defining or non-defining? Okay, if you said non-defining relative clause, you're correct. Now let's look at why. Now I'm going to cover this up, and let's see what it says. She's from Seoul, Korea. Okay, if I just think of the word Seoul, Korea, I understand which one you're talking about. There's only one Seoul, Korea. So I don't need to define what is Seoul, Korea, where is Seoul, Korea, which Seoul, Korea are we talking about. No, it's understood. So I'm just going to give extra information about that. So if it's extra information, remember that's a non-defining relative clause. So that's why this is non-defining. Now let's look at another reason. She's from Seoul, Korea, which is the place where Monica lived. I'm using a comma, and remember that with non-defining relative clauses, we use that comma to separate it from the other part of the sentence. Okay? A good way to think about non-defining relative clauses is to think, does this make sense? She's from Seoul, Korea. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I don't need any extra information to understand this sentence, to understand what are we talking about. Okay? So if it makes sense, then I know that the extra information is always non-defining, right? Now, remember, in non-defining relative clauses, we can use which, but we cannot use that, right? Even though I'm talking about a place, which is technically a thing, I cannot use that. Why? Well, remember, that is only used in defining relative clauses. And because this is non-defining, we cannot use that. We can only use which. Or if it's a person, who. Okay? Now let's look at the next one. So again, this girl, she's Ashley's friend that is studying abroad right now. So this is the relative clause, but is it defining or non-defining? If you said defining, you are correct. Now again, I'm going to cover this information, and we're going to say this. She's Ashley's friend. Okay? Well, she has a lot of friends. She has many friends. So in this context, I'm like, yeah, but which friend? So this information is defining, well, specifically, out of all of Ashley's friends, which friend is she? I need more specific information. Can you define which friend? So this information is defining her, and that's defining relative clause. So she's Ashley's friend that is studying abroad right now. That's a defining relative clause. And notice we don't have a comma, because we do not use the comma with defining relative clauses. But let's think about another thing. We can also use who, right? Because that is for defining relative clauses, and this is defining, so that's okay. But I can also use who because I'm talking about a person. So remember, defining relative clauses, I can use who or that for people, or even which if I'm talking about a thing. Good. So I hope this was helpful in understanding how we use these relative clauses and what the difference is between the defining and the non-defining relative clause. So good luck, and thanks for watching, guys. Bye.